unbelievably large and wonderful coalition of groups that's been working in Washington over the last several years to kind of make this thing work better at the level. Nick?
Thanks. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There we go. Come on. As David said, my name is Nick Donahue. I'm the Policy and Legislative Director at Transportation for America. We're a national coalition and campaign of about 500 organizations that work exclusively at this time in the federal transportation policy. And really our goal, as you can tell with kind of some of our members up here, is we're trying to bring a more balanced voice to Congress. In the past, they've heard a lot from road builders, they heard a lot from labor unions, they heard a lot from state DOTs, and then ordinary people, local governments and their needs were basically not heard from, or if they were heard from, they were very much, couldn't really hear their voice and the screaming from everyone else. And so we were really formed to kind of scream as well, so that your voice can be heard a little bit better in DC. And what I'm going to talk about here today is a few kind of key concepts in the new transportation bill. I'm not going to cover everything that's in all 600 pages of fine print, but we do have a new handbook that does walk through all of those 600 pages in about 100 pages that you can download from our website. There are some handouts, I think, in the back table there that will give you the address, and I really would encourage you to download it. It was really put together to kind of be a playbook for either local government or a stakeholder or anyone else on the ground level interacting with either the federal government or your state DOT, which at times can be difficult kind of moving forward. So there's a few just kind of basic facts about the new federal transportation bill, which is called MAP-21. So if you ever hear anyone say MAP-21, that's the new name for Safety Lou, which was the new name for T-21, et cetera, et cetera. It's the big federal policy that we have to rewrite every few years that's going to govern how this money that's coming down here to your, the area council here, as well as TxDOT and the Metro transit system, how they can use their money that they get from the feds and how they can spend it, and more importantly, what they can't really spend it on. And a couple of big concepts is we really celebrated the fact that this transportation bill did not cut funding, which, as you all know, people are driving less, cars are more fuel efficient, and we're bringing essentially less money than we've been spending. In fact, it took $20 billion in additional non-gas tax or user fee revenue to allow us to continue spending just the money we were spending in 2012, moving forward in 2013 and 2014. This is important not just because there's no new money, so there's going to be more competition as our needs grow, but it also meant that a lot of things that we had done in the past to make these transportation bills kind of sail through Congress no longer happened. So you've heard everyone bemoan earmarks and whether or not you think they're a good thing or a bad thing. They made transportation bills pass without a lot of people getting in there and mucking up the policy. Well, without earmarks, what are you as a freshman Tea Party member of the House of Representatives going to go back and tell your constituents you did? You have to eliminate some form of fraud, waste, or abuse, or you have to do something else to kind of actually demonstrate that you've done something these last 2 years and, hey, please re-elect me in November. Kind of moving forward, and so what we had on this reauthorization of the federal transportation bill for the first time in a very, very long time is you had a ton of people who actually cared about policy. That may sound weird to all of you who come here to hear more about policy, but they don't care. For the most part, they don't care. You have a few committees with a few staff that are really kind of knowledgeable on this issue and know the ins and outs, and the members who can read the right talking points in the right order. Beyond that, people typically have not engaged on it, but that changed a lot on this bill kind of moving forward, and that's resulted in a lot of the types of things that you'll hear about and how the bill changed money flowing out back to the states. So if you kind of just look a quick snapshot at MAP-21, you get the exact same amount of money this year as you did last year. Kind of looks the same. There's no new money. There's really no new programs besides that one I talked about earlier for planning grants. So is MAP-21 even really that different kind of moving forward? And the thing I would say is it's very, very different once you kind of get down a step below the top here. And so if here's just a few quick facts, and again, I'm not going to walk into all of these because I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about performance measures, but one of the major things is the House of Representatives decided that part of waste, fraud, and abuse that must be eliminated from this bill was funding for walking and biking infrastructure. It was actually a #1 target of the Majority Leader Eric Cantor from Virginia as we worked on this bill, and was the subject of, I want to say, 8 floor speeches. People typically don't give floor speeches in Congress on transportation, let alone about a sub-piece of this bill. And so this was actually one of the major sticking points of the bill, and it did kind of move forward with continued funding. But here in Texas, your funding is going to be cut by $20 million, which is about 20% of your overall funding. One of the other major changes is a lot of the flexible money that the Texas Department of Transportation got and that this regional area council here used to get, that could be spent on a grid of streets, building boulevards, building transit, making walking and biking safer, was cut. And it was cut overall kind of by 8% and a dollar for dollar comparison. But what's really important is a lot of the money, a lot of responsibilities that used to be paid for with other funds now have to be paid for with this money. So not only did this pot of money that the, and I'm going to say it wrong, H-GAC, how do you pronounce it? Is that right?
That's good.
Yeah, you can tell I'm from DC, I'm up here butchering this in front of you. But a lot of the money they used to get, they had the state paying to fix bridges, and then they could use the money they got for transit, for local street projects. And what's happened under MAP-21 is the state has more money than it used to have, and the money the state has, they can't use it to fix the bridges that are here in this region that aren't on like the interstate or some other major highway. So the net result of this is, as a regional council or as a local mayor from one of your towns here, whereas in the past you had a buck and you could spend it in between expanding bus service or improving walking and biking safety, now thrown into kind of the competition for money there is an existing bridge that may need to be fixed. And if you're a responsible mayor, you're going to fix that bridge. And so this leaves less money overall for providing more transportation options, for building kind of a grid of streets or expanding transit kind of across the country, unless you're willing to get the state DOT to kind of take action. Again, I'm not going into this as kind of a complex issue, but just think about it this way. You have the same amount of allowance and your chores have doubled. Something wasn't right that happened here in this bill as far as it works for local regions and their communities. But the issue I really want to talk about today is performance measures, because I think this is the biggest change in MAP-21, and it's going to be the change that I think has the most impact moving forward for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so MAP-21 requires the United States Department of Transportation to establish performance measures in about 7 category areas, and your MPO as well as your state DOT are going to have to use these measures when they tell you how they plan to spend money. So when you do your new kind of long-range plan here, one of the things that the state or the MPO is going to tell you is, how are we doing right now with these measures, and how do we think we're going to be doing in year 20 with these measures? And then as they come up with short-term spending plans that cover about 4 or 5 years, they're going to have to tell you whether or not that spending plan helps you make progress towards your 20-year kind of goal moving forward. Now, the one thing I would say is there's no penalty if you don't meet these targets. If all of a sudden more people are hitting the road walking and biking, you don't all of a sudden take money and use that to improve safety for people walking and biking. So you may say, so what? And I think that's a really valuable question, but the so what to me is really, really important, because one of the things that states really react to is being compared. We've never actually had apples to apples kind of performance measures or comparisons where we could look at one state, say Texas, and compare it with another state like Colorado and kind of tell one DOT, hey, why are they doing so much better than us? Don't they kind of get the same amount of money per the number of people that they have? And I'll give you a little anecdote to show you how much I really think states will respond to these measures, even though there's no penalties. 4 years ago, I had the pleasure or mistake of serving as the Assistant Secretary of Transportation in Virginia when the Recovery Act or the stimulus was passed. And there were no official performance measures attached to that bill. But there was one member of Congress who chaired one committee who decided he was upset because he didn't have a more formal role in shaping how the money flowed in the Recovery Act. And so he created an unofficial reporting process and said, every state, you're going to tell me how you're doing on the performance of the Transportation Recovery Act money, and I'm going to tell you whether or not you're good or bad. He came up with one performance measure. I wouldn't really say it was a measure of performance. It was just how fast are you spending the money. It wasn't are you spending it well, are you picking good projects, just how fast are you doing it. And in Virginia, we thought we were doing a really good job because we were talking to people and asking them how we thought we should spend it instead of just picking projects right off the bat and spending the money. Consequently, this member of Congress said we were the worst. So he put out the first report and we were 51st. We were even behind the DC. DC, come on! So we were dead last. And the second that report came out, a lot of people in the press called the governor's office. More importantly, some members of the legislature called the governor's chief of staff. And then unfortunately for me, I got my butt chewed on by the governor's chief of staff, who then also chewed on my boss, who came back to chew on my butt one more time for good measure. And then we spent weeks and months busting our butts to make sure that we were not dead last. We couldn't be dead last because, oh my God, we're dead last. How can we be the worst? We have pride. We're good. We're good at our jobs. We're not the worst. I think we ended up at like 47 after a lot of work. We really focused on it. We talked about it like daily. Literally, I'm not joking, every day or at the end of every week, I got a spreadsheet saying how much more money had we spent, when did we expect to spend the rest of it. And again, this was just one member of Congress that finally came up with a uniform way of comparing states and regions. We're now going to have the people who actually give us the money come up with measures, and they're going to be a little bit broader than just are you spending it, and they're going to look at these concepts and tell us whether or not we're doing good. And it's not just going to be states. It's now going to be regions. Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas will also now have to use these measures that I show you right up here to talk about how they're spending their money and whether or not they're achieving performance. Now, the one thing I would say to you is, what is performance? And I think how we measure performance and what we say performance is really can change whether or not these performance measures help advance equitable and sustainable transportation in this region, but also across the country. And so I've bolded a few types of measures here that I think are the ones that are really unclear, and I want to walk just through some pictures and graphs to show you how these can either help some of the things and the visions that you all are advancing in this region that we heard folks talking about, and the demographic choices and preferences that you're seeing kind of take place here, or whether or not these measures are going to get in the way. So the first thing with performance measures now is, in the past we've really only measured performance on roads like this. We've mostly looked at interstates and we looked at like how fast are we going on the interstate. We're now looking at roads like this. This is Brazos Road down here in downtown. This is now part of the national highway system. One of the core key federal roadways in this region. There's going to be two performance measures governing how this road is doing. We really can't measure that road like this road, because if we do, a lot of the things you all are trying to achieve with regard to economic development, growth, and other things are not going to be possible, because while you may want to live next to this road, I don't want to live right next to this road, and I doubt you do either. So before I get into the measures that we're really advocating for, I think it's important to look at, well, what have we done in the past, and how we measured performance. And I think one of the most frequent ways we've looked at performance in the transportation community is actually something that was developed here in Texas. It's called the Travel Time Index that comes out of the Texas Transportation Institute annual urban mobility reports. And what they do in that report is they compare how much longer does it take to drive somewhere in rush hour than it does at 3 in the morning. I think that was probably when it came out, an innovative concept. Right now, I'm not sure we actually want to use a measure like that to determine whether or not it's actually the road is performing well, because I actually don't care how a road works at 3 in the morning because I'm asleep. And how it works and when I'm sleeping to when I want to use it doesn't really tell me much, other than maybe it's great when I'm sleeping, which again, doesn't matter. So here's kind of just two cities that I think can really explain this point and put much better than I did there. If you look at Atlanta, it has a travel time index of 1.35. Your goal in the travel time index is to be 1. That means that somehow at 8 in the morning or 8:30, you can drive just as fast as you can at 3 in the morning. I think Detroit has achieved that. And I'm not sure any other place really has, or what if you want to. But that's kind of the goal here with the travel time index. Then we look at Chicago. They have one of 1.43. So that's like 25% worse than Atlanta. So logic would tell you driving in Atlanta must be worse, or driving in Chicago must be worse than driving in Atlanta. But let's look at some other kind of things here. The average driver in Atlanta takes almost an hour to get to work. The average driver in Chicago gets to work in 36 minutes. Who wants to drive in Atlanta instead of Chicago? Raise your hand. We got one volunteer over here, very brave volunteer. You can actually get to work faster during rush hour in Chicago on average than you can at 3 in the morning in Atlanta. That should tell you something. This measure doesn't actually capture a lot of the impacts that exist there in these various communities, and it really distorts the type of picture. We say Atlanta is doing better, but right now, none of you volunteered to go drive in Atlanta instead of Chicago on your way to work. I want to actually compare one city because I think that's more meaningful over time, and I think this comparison hopefully should resonate for you all, and it's the Denver region. And Denver kind of is a little bit ahead of you guys with their transit system, but you all are following a very similar path with a lot of the kind of the transit plans, hot lanes, and other things that they've done in the Denver region. So in 1982, Denver was a pretty kind of spread out, much more highway-oriented type of region. In 1994, they opened their first light rail line, and since that time, they've opened up 40 miles total, and they're working on another 80 miles of light rail and commuter rail. And so I just want to kind of go through some of these same performance measures in Denver, because you guys have opened your first light rail line a few years ago. You have 2 or 3 more that are set to open in 2014. Let's just see kind of how this looked for Denver, because this is how these things might work for you. So in 1982 in Denver, people got to work in about 50 minutes. After adding 1 million people between 1982 and 2007, people still got to work in 50 minutes. Now that may not sound impressive, but if you look across the country, actually maintaining transportation performance has been close to impossible, and very few regions have done it. Usually you hear the goal of reducing bad things from happening. Here you actually have a region who stopped bad things from getting worse at all, which again is pretty remarkable. But again, if we look at the measures that we use most often today, the travel time index, things got 300% worse in Denver. Their travel time index went from 1.09 to 1.31. Another measure that you often hear people talk about is delay. And delay is the figure where they figure out how much time how many vacation days you spent sitting in traffic. I've actually given up my car and I've never gotten those vacation days back. But if we look at Denver in 1982, the average person spent about 4.2 minutes extra driving because of delay. So that was their delay during rush hour. In 2007, that delay had gone up about 3 times to almost 12 minutes. But miraculously, the amount of time it took people to get to work went down by a minute. And what this was is it's recognizing that transportation has 2 key influencing factors. It's how fast you drive and how far apart things are. And when Denver started building its light rail system and promoting a program of transit-oriented development, all of a sudden jobs and housing were closer together, and they didn't make the whole region look like Manhattan, Washington, D.C., or any of those other places, but just near their light rail stations, they built development that the market wanted, that the developers wanted to build, and it worked out for folks who lived in all different places of Denver because it put jobs closer to where houses were throughout the entire region. And if we have the wrong types of measures, think about what this could mean for you guys. I told you what happened in Virginia when I worked there, and just one member of Congress put out a report saying we were bad on a measure that probably didn't make sense. What happens if the United States Department of Transportation, the experts, come out and take one of these measures like delay or travel time index and slap a thick report, down in front of the press saying, yeah, Houston, you thought those light rails were the right thing to do, you thought those hot lanes were the right thing to do, your delay has gone up. But then all of you all here know that, hey, we're getting to work in the same amount of time. It's not any different. These measures are really going to drive the way that funds get spent in the future, and if we pick the wrong ones, some of the things that you're hoping to advance that might make transportation more equitable or more sustainable in this region may get an F when they're not doing anything bad. And that would really be a problem. And if you dig a little bit deeper in Denver, here's 1993. Things actually got worse for drivers in the Denver region between 1982 and 1993. And then remember, in 1994, they opened their first light rail line, and you can see average travel times actually going down by 6 minutes. So as they started to grow, and before they put in place their transit and the transit-oriented development, commutes were actually becoming much worse for people. And then since that time, as they've opened these lines and put in place the TOD, you've seen travel times kind of slowly chip down over time from 1994 all the way to 2007. And you know, like right here, this is from Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Tryon Street, not that that's an important street name for you to remember, but both sides of the street used to look like this undeveloped side of the street. Then they put the blue line in on the other side of these brand new apartment buildings, which then were built in the city, pretty close to downtown, as you can see with the skyscrapers there in the background. And I've talked with the Charlotte City DOT director, and he hopes both sides of the street will soon look like the one with the apartment building there. But he also said this development is going to make that road move a little bit slower. But he thinks that's going to be okay because things will be that much closer together as you build along this corridor. And I think, you know, as you guys have, again, I think it's 3 lines opening in 2014, you know, the developers are going to come knocking on your door soon to start, you know, putting in place transit development. If you have those wrong measures, TxDOT may raise a flag saying, hey, don't do this. We're going to get an F on our report card, and the last thing we want is an F, because an F is bad. And so this is really important stuff, even though it doesn't sound very interesting. And again here, this is your southeast line. You are actually on the National Highway System on MLK Jr. Boulevard there. So this roadway is going to have several performance measures, and TxDOT is actually responsible for one of them that's going to look at this road. Do you want TxDOT going in there and saying you can't add more trains on this part of the line because it's on the National Highway System and that might add 30 seconds of delay and bring down our performance measure? I'm actually going to skip these just in the name of time.